Hello everyone, my name is Emma and I'm currently a junior at Brown University studying International and Public Affairs. I drove up here to volunteer for Dean because one, it is just that important, and two, I knew that he would listen to me just as much as he would Granite State voters. I'll be honest, before I heard about Dean, I felt pretty discouraged about the state of our country's politics. You know, my mom would turn on the news every morning and it seemed like every day there was yet another story about corruption, money politics, partisan gridlock, and a nation that was just ever more divided into factions of red and blue. However, it was during my internship search in the fall of my sophomore year that I stumbled upon an opportunity in Dean's congressional office on Capitol Hill, as Dean had also attended Brown University himself. And even though my faith in our government had started to dwindle at the time, I figured that it was worth a shot to, take on an internship in Congress and see if there was hope for change. So fast forward a couple months, and there I was in Washington, D.C., experiencing life as an intern on the Hill. I expected my time to mainly consist of getting people coffee and answering phones, but I couldn't have been more pleasantly surprised with my experience. Every day I was charged with administrative, legislative, and communications tasks that really allowed me to gain valuable experience into the day-to-day inner workings of a congressional office. And more than that, apart from the engaging work that I was trusted to do, I was blown away by the effort that Dean made to get to know each and every one of his interns. He asked us about our interests, about our opinions on certain issues, and things we wanted to see change in our country. We felt heard, we felt seen, and we felt appreciated. So when Dean says that everyone's invited, I can personally attest he really does mean it. Dean's internship opportunity was not only helpful for me to gain professional work experience, but it was also one of the most empowering moments for me personally. While I was a student at one of the best universities in the world, I had always struggled with imposter syndrome and feeling like I deserved a seat at the table in such a high-achieving academic environment, let alone in the U.S. House of Representatives. But I remember leaving D.C. this past summer feeling not only much more confident in myself as a thinker and a speaker and a writer and a problem solver, but much more inspired to be part of change. That's why I'm here today, and also much more confident about the future of our country. Talk of Dean potentially running for president began towards the end of my internship, and I told myself back then that if that were to ever become a reality, which it has, I would do anything I could to help get him to the White House. So, Dean is genuine, he's passionate, he's driven, he's contagiously optimistic, he's pragmatic, and I'm confident that he will get things done. So, without further ado, introducing the next President of the United States, Congressman Dean Phillips.
You got one? I get the double microphone. Whoa!
Okay.
Give it up for Emma, by the way. One of our extraordinary Dean team members, an intern for me back in Washington and now joining our campaign, and amazing, and just one of thousands of young people who are just waiting to be inspired, right? Yeah. Hey, you know why I love Keene more than anything else? Because it rhymes with Dean. Yay! How about that? Hey, anybody ready for change in this room? Yeah. Anybody ready for a little bit of hope and a little bit of joy and a little bit of optimism again? I sure as heck am, and that's why I'm doing this, everybody. I believe not only can we do better, we must do better. You ready for health care for everybody? You ready for housing for everybody? You ready for people to be able to go to college and not be burdened with tens of thousands of dollars in debt? Yeah, how about a little bit more peace in the world and a little less war? That's why I'm doing this, my friends. And I don't care about your politics, I care about your principles. And that's why I'm here to ask for your vote and for your consideration, and to recognize that no matter what the Democratic National Committee and President Biden want, which is to disengage, disenfranchise, and to make your First in the Nation primary meaningless, you actually have the most remarkable opportunity in the history, I think, of the United States to send the opposite message back to Washington, which is not only does it matter and is it meaningful, it will literally be the day, January 23rd, that changes everything. Everything. The power is in your hands because if we surprise, because of all of you, everything changes on day 2. And we're going to change the trajectory of this entire race and of the future and of the world. And for all my colleagues and all my friends and my family and my neighbors of all colors and races and religions and geographies. Because the country somehow has slipped away from us because 2 parties are not working for us. They're fighting each other instead of fighting for each other. And that's why I am running for president. I don't know if you know my life story. I lost my dad in Vietnam when I was just 6 months old. He could not afford college. Grew up poor in St. Paul. My grandmother, Ruth, worked at a department store to just get enough money to try to make ends meet. He couldn't afford it. He earned an ROTC scholarship and was sent to Vietnam in 1968, right before I was born. And in July 25th of 1969, he was killed in action, just 3 days after the United States landed on the moon. How many of you remember that day? I'm looking ahead, not behind. You know, I went to Vietnam for the first time in my life this March. I got to go to the very site in Pleiku, Vietnam, where he took his last breath. He was killed in a helicopter crash. And with him were soldiers that were the mosaic of America. 2 Jewish guys, 2 black guys, a couple of Italian guys, and a Mexican-American named David Valdez, who so badly wanted to become an American that he joined the United States Army with the promise that he would be naturalized, which he was just weeks before he died. And I say that because when I was on that site, I recognized the power of the United States, the power of the US presidency, and I thought of all those soldiers just a few days before they died and the hundreds of thousands with them, looking up at the moon that day and seeing the United States at our very, very best, and looking down at their boots in Vietnam and seeing us at our very worst. And here we are, 50-some years later, 55 years later, and we're still at that same crossroads. What kind of country do we want to be? The one that looks up and looks forward, or is constantly looking back? And I have great respect for President Biden, but we have 2 candidates who are right now leading that most of the country does not want, that represent yesterday. And I just think it's time that we look forward and reinvent and reimagine and relieve the suffering in our country and the entire world. So when my dad was killed, I was 6 months old, my mom was 24 and widowed, and we had nowhere to go. So we lived with my great-grandparents for 3 years. And in 1972, my mom remarried, and I got lucky. I got really lucky. My mom married an amazing man who adopted me, brought me into a remarkable family with businesses and philanthropy and a whole lot of advice, because my grandma became Dear Abby and my aunt Ann Landers. Again, for this group, not this one. Because they're all looking blankly like, who are they? Well, this is before Google, before you could actually like send your lovelorn messages through the internet. And I was so fortunate, and I just don't believe that it should be a stroke of good luck or the zip code in which you are born that dictates where you end up. And I know that I'm probably the most fortunate kid who lost a dad in Vietnam, who lost a mom or dad in Iraq or Afghanistan. I don't think there's a kid in this entire country whose life changed somehow for the better, strangely enough, because of a tragedy. And that's why I'm trying to do this. So when I was adopted, I felt so fortunate. I had a great-grandfather, Jay Phillips, who taught me the most important lesson of my life. He said, Dean, money is like manure. If you stack it up, it stinks. But if you spread it out, it fertilizes. That's how we ran our businesses. That's how we run our philanthropy. And that's exactly the lens I look through every time I use my voting card in Washington, D.C. Because we have enough. We've got lots of resources. We're the most extraordinary wealthy country in human history. But where's it all going? We can't be a country in which a third of all the wealth, 33% of the wealth, is in the hands of just 1%. When the bottom 50% of America, 170 million people, only have 2.5% of all of that wealth. So when the economy grows, Bidenomics, the president is proud, rightfully so, of GDP growth and low unemployment. Well, when you're struggling to make ends meet, when 60% are living paycheck to paycheck, 40% can't afford a $400 emergency, all of that growth is going into the hands of the very few. And I know that because I'm one of them. I'm one of them. So when I entered our family businesses, we believe deeply in sharing success with those who make it possible. Went into the spirits business and built a brand called Belvedere Vodka, which, by the way, starts just like here. I don't know if you know, vodka starts as beer. Lesson for the day. And then got into the ice cream business. Anybody like Talenti Gelato? Yes. Yay. Yeah, that's usually like the biggest, round of applause. The pint, by the way, is a single serve, and that is all we ask, one a night. And we sold that business to the Ben & Jerry's people, and then I'm watching the 2016 election. You remember that night? Remember how you felt? I'm trying to return us to that moment in 2008 when Barack Obama won that election. Remember him coming out with his family in Chicago, and you felt something that I'm sure most of us in this room had never felt before, overwhelming joy of what's possible in this country. And in 2016, it was just the opposite. How is it possible that just 8 years later, we could have taken a turn like we did? But I told my family that night that we have a responsibility in the United States to support a new president no matter what. And I told them the White House will moderate him. It'll reduce his worst proclivities. And of course, I was way wrong. But what was really jarring for me was waking up the next morning. And the first thing I heard was my daughter Pia crying in her bedroom. She was 16 years old. She had just overcome Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was, you can imagine, a horrible time for her and for our family. And she's a gay woman, and I did not know that when she was 16. But when I looked in her eyes that day, I saw something that really jarred me. My daughter, from a family of privilege, which I recognize, being afraid to be an American. And we sat down that morning at our table. We FaceTimed her sister, my daughter Daniela, at college. And I promised my daughters right then and there at the breakfast table that I would do something. Gave up my life in Minnesota, decided I'd run for Congress. So I asked my friends and people I really respected, what do you think of this idea? And they said, you're nuts. You're going to lose. You're going to torpedo your career. You can imagine I heard some of those things in the last few weeks as well. And I did it. And not only did we do it, we flipped a district that had been Republican since 1958, 60 years. We beat a Republican. We beat a Republican who had won that night in 2016 by 14 points. And people say, how did you do that? It's so darn easy. Because you see, I come from the business world where I've never seen a company succeed by demeaning and degrading 50% of its customers. So what did I do? I used invitation, not confrontation. I invited people to come up and visit. I bought a 1960 International Harvester Metro van. We call it the Dean machine or the government repair truck. It's sitting in Manchester right now. And I would drive it around my district as I'm driving it around New Hampshire right now, and I'd serve coffee. Sometimes people would come up and visit, sometimes not. But when they did, I put out chairs and people would come and share their dreams. They would share criticisms. They would share ideas. And we'd just kind of shoot the breeze. And I discovered right then and there that angertainment, the angertainment industry, would have us believe we are so much more divided than we really are. And it was a beautiful experience. And I got to Washington and I thought, Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy, they're going to do what you do in America. You bring us together, get us to know each other and break bread and do a ropes course and build some trust, right? No, not at all. They put us on separate buses going to separate events. They wanted us to have as little education as possible. They wanted us to spend every waking moment that we could raising money, dialing for dollars. Why? Because they didn't want the power structure challenged. How do you think you survive in leadership positions for 20 years in Washington? How can you be Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and the like? Not talking about what kind of people they are, I'm just talking about the system that promotes this unbelievable nonsense. So I decided I'm going to do it differently. My wife and I host bipartisan dinners where we break bread and get to know our friends on the other side of the aisle. My first bill I passed that Donald Trump signed into law was the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act, the one that saved thousands of businesses and hundreds of thousands of jobs. With whom did I work? Chip Roy, you know who that is? The Freedom Caucus man. I'm number 2 most bipartisan member of the entire United States Congress. He's probably 433. But that's the whole point. We had a relationship. We still text one another. We don't agree a lot. Sometimes we really disagree, but we do it without being disagreeable. And that's what America is about. Our founders would be appalled. And then I joined the Problem Solvers Caucus. Anybody know the Problem Solvers Caucus? Thank you. That's the problem, though. 1 or 2 people clap when I say that. You wouldn't know because cable news doesn't tell you about the good stuff going on. They don't tell you when we actually cooperate and get things done. They don't feature the workhorses. They feature the show horses. Let me make a prediction. All of the names you know the best in the United States Congress are probably people who are jerks. You know why? Because it's the fastest, most expeditious way to become really famous in politics and raise a whole lot of money. A whole lot of money. So that's the problem. And then this last Congress, I decided I'd run for a leadership post. I was elected by my Democratic caucus peers to join Hakeem Jeffries in the new generation of House leadership for the first time in 20 years. Hakeem Jeffries, an amazing man, a great hope for our future. And I was really excited this year. I sensed that change was coming. The same change I wanted when I got there in 2019 for a new generation. The same change that I thought Joe Biden would afford us after his first term, when he kind of made the implication that it would be a one-term president, pass the torch to this great new generation. But that wasn't the case. And I decided that I would be public with my perspective, that it was time because he was going to lose to Donald Trump. I asked him to pass the torch publicly. I took a lot of heat from my colleagues. And then I called other people whose names you might know better than me. Governor Whitmer, Governor Pritzker, asking them to jump in the race because in the United States, we practice democracy. We do not suppress it. We should not have a party, Democrats, Republicans, anybody else, that tries to prevent people from running for office, to prevent people from voting, to prevent debate. But they wouldn't have it. They didn't even want to have a conversation. In fact, they said, don't use our names. In the United States of America, people aspiring to be the leaders of the free world, not wanting their names used because they're waiting until 2028. Well, my friends, there may not be a 2028 if Donald Trump is elected. So I decided 2 months before I ended up deciding to run for president, I left the Democratic leadership table because I was really appalled. My friends, who I believed to be a principal, had caught the same disease that my friends across the aisle had been suffering from for 4 years. The disease is silence and lying. My friends on the Republican side, they know what kind of man Donald Trump is because they would tell me, we would talk about it. They know he is grotesque and dangerous. And then they'd get in front of the TV cameras and you know what they said? You know what they said. And then I had my Democratic colleagues who would talk in quiet tones in the hallways, at the tables, behind closed doors, about President Biden, and then get in front of the TV cameras and say something totally different. So I said, I'm going to resign from this. My principles are so incongruent with the people that I believed were the most principled in this country. And then I decided I would run for president, because if not me, who, and if not now, when? And that's why I came to Concord on October 27th and said, I declare my name for president. Because we cannot afford Donald Trump to be back in the White House. And everybody who's paying attention, I think all of you are, Joe Biden cannot win. Not because he's not a good man, not because he's not able, but because Americans have decided they do not want him. That's why the polls have him behind nationally. That's why the polls have him losing in every single battleground state. That is why the polls now show him with the lowest approval numbers in American presidential history. And that's why he cannot win. Joe Biden is Donald Trump's best dream. And we've got to wake ourselves up from this delusion. We are sleepwalking into disaster, my friends. And I promise you, I can beat him. And the reason is this. Not just because I'm next generation and our country is hungry for change, it's because I know how to unify independent and Republican voters who want decency, integrity, competency, and honesty. And I'm here to tell you a few things about honesty. I'm a Democrat who believes we need Medicare for all. I'm a Democrat who believes everybody should have a home in America. I'm a Democrat who believes everybody who wants to be educated should do so without massive debt. I'm also a Democrat who believes we have a horrible crisis at the southern border. I'm not going to lie to you. I've been there twice. Shame on our party for ignoring it and saying everything is fine. It is the foremost responsibility of the American president to keep us safe and secure our borders and make sure that the United States has the most robust security in the world. And I care deeply about immigration. Most of you in this room had foremothers or forefathers who came here for the same reason that these same people are coming right now, to have a chance to build a life and pursue their dreams, right? Some of you yourselves may have come from somewhere else. I love you, I love that. Republicans love that. But what we don't love is knowing that tens of thousands of people are approaching our border a day, thousands of which are not even encountered. We don't know who they are. And yet we spend $1 trillion a year defending our country? I'm here to tell you the truth. We can manage our country with a fiscally responsible manner. We can secure our borders. We can have a humane immigration policy that welcomes people. But we can't keep lying, and we can't keep being so purist in our principles and our policy principles that we preclude decency and common sense. So that's my proposition to you: to do better, to change the course of this country, to change the course of world history, and most importantly, perhaps right now, is to change the course of the Democratic Party, the party in which I've invested so much of my life, many of you yourselves, your tears and your sweat, to do better for people. And we have gone wayward. We have a party right now that is literally suppressing voters so badly that your state, the Granite State, had to send a letter to our party last week, a cease and desist letter for the unlawful suppression of voters. Have you seen that on MSNBC? Yeah. No. Barely. Have you seen what North Carolina has done? Same thing. They're suppressing voters and candidates by saying Joe Biden already won the presidential primary. Their law is very clear. If you're a presidential candidate, 35 years old, born in the United States, and recognized in the national news media as being a candidate, you're on the ballot. What did the Democratic Party do? Submitted one name, Joe Biden. There will not be a primary in the state of Florida or the state of North Carolina because there's only one name on the ballot. What is democracy if there's only one name on the ballot? You know where that happens? Places like Russia, Iran. I'm a Democrat. I'm a member of Congress. I'm the ranking member of the Middle East Subcommittee on Foreign Affairs. I'm a candidate for president, but you won't see me on the ballot because of our party. I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. And that's why I'm combining both joy and honesty, and integrity and competency, and most of all, decency, because we got a lot of work to do. And that's why I'm here to ask you for one thing: your vote on January 23rd. Your advocacy, your integrity, your courage to shake it up and do better for them. Because in 2028, there will not be another election if Donald Trump is elected. Think about these young people right here, these amazing young people, some of whom cannot vote yet, but they're putting their passion into this campaign because they know what is going to happen. They need us. And our party is preventing it. So with that said, I love you all. I am excited. I am full of energy. I'm going to power this party to win this November. I'm going to not just help us win the White House, the Senate, the House, and all the down ballot races in this country that right now we're going to lose because of the lack of energy. And you know what I'm talking about. So if you like what you see, you like what you hear, and you believe that things can get better if you participate, join the Dean team. I love you all, and I want to hear what's on your minds. Thanks, everybody. Just so you know, this is water. But boy, a beer would sound good right now.
Hi, Dean. I'm Doug from Excelsior. We've met.
Yeah, Doug, great to see you, my friend. Yeah.
Dean, you mentioned Medicare a couple minutes ago. Medicare and Social Security are very important programs for senior citizens in the United States. If elected president, what will you do to ensure that those programs are available for current and future generations of Americans?
Thank you. Well, let's start with Medicare. I'm proposing Medicare for all. I believe that this country should be a country that affords health care coverage to every single person in the United States of America who's an American citizen, period. We are one of the only countries in the world that doesn't do it that way, which is why we're one of the only countries in the world that spends as much as we do and gets outcomes that are mid-pack. Do you know that 26 million of our neighbors have no health coverage at all? Do you know how you live if you have no health coverage? You're one illness away from bankruptcy. You do not get checkups. You do not go to the doctor when you're not feeling well. And then you know how much more it costs everybody when you get sick because it's too late? Millions more. We do not have health care in America. We have sick care. I believe Medicare for all will help us do a number of things. Lower prices dramatically. We're not going to spend more. We're going to spend less. You know why? Because people are going to we're going to invest in health, mental health, physical health. We're going to make sure that pharmaceutical companies, when I'm president, they can't sell their items here for 1 penny more than they sell it to Canada, to Mexico, to Spain, to Australia, or Japan. It's nonsense. And you know why they do it right now? Because they come to Washington every single year with $300 million that they share with lobbyists and my colleagues to maintain the status quo. That's why I'm the only member of Congress, the only one out of 535 that takes no PAC money. That means no special interest money at all, no lobbyist money. I don't take money from fellow members of Congress. I don't give it to them. And I am one of the only ones that has no leadership PAC. I'm the only one in Congress that doesn't do that because we should not be a country in which money buys votes. We should not be a country in which we allow lobbyists to pay people $5,000 in return for their vote. Why do you think we pay 8 times more? That's why we need Medicare for all, and we will not only make it more robust for seniors, we're going to make it available to everybody. And the government should never be involved in the delivery of care outside of the Veterans Administration. This is a private enterprise for delivery, a public coverage system for the costs, that we simply spread it like the manure so it fertilizes. On Social Security, the most extraordinarily successful anti-poverty program in world history, not just American history, world history. And you've earned it. It's not an entitlement. It's not a maybe. It is an absolute. And I'll tell you what's really remarkable is I've seen so closely how spending a few years in Washington changes people. When you're Joe Biden, if you've been there 50 years, you can imagine how it changes you. I just had lunch in North Conway with 2 extraordinary senior women who told me that the last 3 days of the month they eat cold cereal because their Social Security runs out. And I got to tell you, I've had so many experiences that have jarred me. I knew it existed, but until you put human faces to these stories, you don't really understand the depth of need. So I've considered 2 things that I intend to do. One is to raise the cap, the contribution cap, from $160,000 to $250,000. It's more fair, and it'll extend the program until the late 2040s. And how about this kind of thinking? Now, would you ever find a politician that does something so simple and common sense? Why is it that in 2024, we don't have a simple mechanism by which Americans who've been financially successful and do not need their Social Security could simply return it to a pool that would redistribute it to the lowest 10% of recipients on Social Security? Imagine if the women I sat with in North Conway had just another $100 a month. They'd be eating warm meals at night and living with dignity instead of having to go to a senior center 2 days a week to have lunch because it's free. What's happened to this country? Look at what we are focusing on right now. UFO hearings? Can't even pass a budget, for gosh sakes? You see the nonsense, the cultural wars? It is despicable. That's how we do it. And I don't have all the answers. I want to work with my Republican colleagues. I will be the first president in the modern era that has a bipartisan cabinet. I want a team of rivals, just like Abraham Lincoln used, to keep this country together when it was most at risk. Invited his foremost enemies to sit with him. That's what I want to do. I want to have a youth council, a youth cabinet. One high schooler or one college student from every state in this country to share with me their ideas about artificial intelligence, social media regulation, right? Climate change, gun violence prevention, things that our young people are subject to and cannot believe that our generations haven't addressed. So that we take care of people in the beginning of life and at the end. That's why I love Hubert Humphrey, the man who said the moral test of a government is how it takes care of those in the dawn of life, the dusk of life, and the shadows of life. And that's why I also will be the first president that establishes what I call American Dream accounts. $1,000 endowed in an account to every single baby born in this country that is put into account, invested in American companies in our stock market, that is put on an app so young people are taught financial management in school, learning how to invest. $500 a year can be added to those accounts so that by the time they graduate high school, and you have to graduate to get your money, you'll have $20,000 awaiting you to become an owner of this economy, to put a down payment on a house, to start a small business. And if you serve our country, national service and the Peace Corps, the AmeriCorps, we'll put another $10,000 in so you start your life with $30,000 if you graduate or if you get your GED. How about that? That's the kind of thinking we should be doing. And I'll tell you, the best part about it, it only costs $3.5 billion a year. Now that used to be a lot of money. But considering we're a country that we just passed the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, with $866 billion in it. My proposition might be, you know what, maybe next year, let's make it $863 billion and start American lives in the black instead of the red.
We've got one question back here, Congressman.
Sure.
Oh, hi, Congressman. My name is Alexis. To be honest, I stumbled in here to get a beer, and I'm seeing you.
As long as you don't
speak, and
stumble out.
I really love, no. I like your common sense approach to governance. But my question is, when Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, I really cried, and when Dobbs was decided, I'm scared, and when I see what's really going on with abortion restrictions in certain states and women being prosecuted for having miscarriages and the case that's going on in Texas, that really has made me very passionate specifically for that issue. And I my question is, how would you as president protect women's rights and women's health and access to abortion?
Thank you. The question is such a clear one, such a cut and dry one, how to protect women's reproductive rights and, frankly, women's freedom. I protect it with 150% of what I got. Now, 100% should suffice, but we need 50% more because of the lack of progress by Democrats over the last 30 years. When we had a chance to codify those rights into law, we didn't. You know why? Politics. So many people focused on trying to win their next election that they didn't want to take the risk. I don't mind torpedoing my career in Congress because I don't want to see my country torpedoed. I don't want to see a Ruth Bader Ginsburg circumstance with our president right now who is walking into the same nightmare. He's a good man, but he will be 82 at this next election and 86, and we all see in front of our eyes what is happening, and we cannot afford him to lose. Most importantly, that's how we do this. I believe in freedom, I believe in liberty. If you are a conservative or a libertarian, I would imagine you do too. And what more important example of that than ensuring government stays out of any decision about a woman's body and stays out of anything in our bedrooms and our homes because it is nonsensical. And that is centrist, that is moderate, that is common sense, and that is, strangely enough, common ground. Because when voters are actually opining on this issue, in red states and blue states, they're saying the same thing. That's all you need to know about why Washington is so broken and what I'm going to fix. Yes, sir.
Should Dr. Fauci be prosecuted?
Should Dr. Fauci be prosecuted? Absolutely not. The man served this country with such extraordinary dedication for decades, saving millions of lives. And if you think, anybody thinks, that he should be prosecuted for doing his best to save us, in fact, if Dr. Fauci had had his way, the truth is, I think 1 million Americans would still be alive right now. What he did in Africa was save millions of lives. This man, we're all human beings. None of us can make good decisions in the absence of information, especially with a pandemic raging, no research done, lots of questions. And when you're facing that as a leader of the free world, you have a responsibility to try your best to keep people safe with what you got. And that's exactly what he did. I think it is shameful the way he's been treated. Did we all want to wear masks? No. Did we all want to get the shots when we were a little worried about them? Of course not. But considering what happened, do you know that 10,000 Americans died last month from COVID? Do you know how many Americans would still be alive right now? Not just older people, but young people. Now, I understand when you're frustrated about the invasion of privacy or having to be inconvenienced, but my goodness, isn't the essence of patriotism looking out for your fellow American? That's how I see it. And I'm not saying that he did everything right. I'm not saying that the government did everything right. I'm not saying I would have done everything right. But I sure would have done and will do everything I can to keep Americans safe. Because if I can save one life and put some others through some inconvenience, I will do that. But I will use data and I will use science. I will not use politicians to tell me what policy we should have. I will use professionals, and that is perhaps the biggest difference. And I think Anthony Fauci should be celebrated. Yes. And if you just say your name.
I'm Ada. I'm a professional tax preparer, and I've noticed that there's some figures in the tax code that haven't been adjusted for inflation. For instance, the way that you figure out how much of your Social Security income is taxable was set into law in 1983 when neither of us could vote, I think. There's also the filing limit you have to earn only $400 self-employment before you start paying taxes on it. And then how much money is taxed to fund the unemployment fund. So I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, Ada, before I even answer your question, just show everybody here, how thick would the book of tax code be if you had a book here right now? How thick?
Well, I don't know, but it would probably reach the ceiling at least once.
Yeah. And how many people in here have read that book? That's why we have a lot of accountants, thank goodness, in this country. But there you have the whole problem. It is designed to be complicated. It is designed to be a system in which special interests can come to Washington with a boatload of money and make sure that their little nook and cranny in that huge book to the ceiling is covered. Why do you think we have such favorable treatment for wealthy people, for well-connected people, for people in real estate? It's nonsensical. Everything you just shared, by the way, is something I should look into, and I'd like to hear, frankly, more about it. But there you have the problem. And by the way, the fact is that we tax Social Security. What a perfect example of, I think, a very odd behavior in the United States of America. I mean, think about it. Especially when we have so many seniors that are barely getting by. So I think it's just time for a national conversation. I'm not going to give you every proposition right now, but I can tell you one thing. People like me should actually be investing more in our country. I want to invest more in my country, but I want to do it when I know the person in the White House will do it with effectiveness and efficiency and integrity. And I don't think we have that right now. We don't have a Pentagon that has passed an audit. Right? We don't have a tax system that makes sure that the middle class can succeed. Oh, let's make sure we...
Weather alert, weather alert.
Look at, now, you know, Minnesotans and Granite Staters are awfully similar. The only difference is you got mountains and we got lakes. Well, you have lakes too, but we have a lot more of them. I trade you a few lakes, by the way, for a few mountains if anybody's want to do a little bartering. Your point is a really good one. There are lots of loopholes and nonsensical parts, including this other one. They call it the carried interest loophole, which means that hedge fund billionaires, people are literally earning hundreds of millions of dollars a year. They're paying 20% roughly, capital gains tax on their income, that all of the rest of us would be paying probably in the high 30s, right? Roughly? Yeah. That's called a loophole because they're so well connected and they spend so much money on members of Congress that we maintain this stupidity. So I'll leave it at that. Our tax code is a mess. We should simplify it. We should make sure the wealthiest people, the wealthiest companies share more. And we need to have a government that's run effectively and efficiently. And when I'm president, we will also have, the first time ever, have an international consulting firm do an assessment of every single agency, every single program, and every single expenditure in the federal budget, which, by the way, is about the same size, and make recommendations independently to the United States of America and Congress and me about how we can do better, deliver effectively our services more effectively, more efficiently. If it's not returning on our investment, we end it. And if someone else can do it better, we outsource it. Because I think that's what we deserve, and until that happens, we're not going to be able to change the tax code to make sure we raise enough revenue to stop this fiscal irresponsibility.
Thanks for coming. What, if anything, do you think we should do about AI?
Oh, so glad you asked. So my contention, by the way, on AI stands for artificial intelligence. It is not something that is coming maybe in a few years. It's actually around us right now. It has the potential to revolutionize the world, to be extraordinarily helpful in reducing costs, improving outcomes, particularly in healthcare and service delivery. And it has the potential, if it's used nefariously, to undermine every single one of us in the entire future of this world. But I'm afraid that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are not people who will A, understand this, and B, will not be around to see the most extraordinary effects, both negative and positive. These people will. And not only do I understand AI and the implications and how we can prepare for it, I actually sat at Kevin McCarthy's AI kitchen cabinet, one of 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans that before he was deposed was working with him on developing guardrails so that we can protect our country from AI. Now, Donald Trump and Joe Biden will not answer reporters' questions. They will not debate. They will not sit in front of you and do a town hall or a Q&A. So how do we even know if they know what it is? Is that not concerning? The most extraordinarily disruptive technology coming down the pipeline? That the 2 leading candidates for president of the United States may not even have the sensibility at this stage to understand the implications. I do. I know what Web 3 is. I know what blockchain is. okay? And I can tell you how it can help us and how it can hurt us. I'm not going to waste your time today because it would take about 6 hours to do so, but that's my point. The good news is this. AI should be the most extraordinary changing for good in this country. We should make sure that it is allowed to be innovative. It should be the most extraordinary enterprise in America. We need to work with our friends and our foes around the world to regulate it, and we have to start adopting it soon. Mark my words, I will be the first president of the United States of America that actually intentionally, explicitly embeds artificial intelligence to deliver better service for Americans, customer service. How many of you have ever tried to get a check back from the IRS? Yeah. I'm a member of Congress. You know, about half of our staff, Emma knows, half of our staff time is probably spent being the customer service departments for federal agencies that are so woefully managed that they can't even get a phone answered, let alone get your money back to you. That's why I think we got like $20 million we've returned to constituents in my district alone in the last few years from the IRS because people could not even get their phone answered. And the IRS budget is inadequate. That's why we appropriated $80 billion, and our Republican colleagues have peeled that back as much as they can because somehow they believe that less investment in the IRS is fiscally responsible. It's just the opposite. There are about $800 billion a year that we don't collect from people who owe us money. All of us money. So that's my answer. Yes, sir. Oh, do I have a cabinet position for Andrew Yang? Well, of course, I am not going to talk about vice presidents or cabinet positions until we get there, but I will make this promise. Andrew Yang has been a great inspiration to me. He introduced me to the concept of universal basic income, something that I didn't think much of until I realized it could be the great answer to the question, sir, that you just asked. Because artificial intelligence is going to disrupt this economy and going to eliminate millions of jobs. The good news is those who work with their hands, plumbers and carpenters, pipe fitters, steel workers, they're not at risk. Middle management clerical people, writers, legal aides, at great risk. And I think it's time that we really start testing universal basic income or guaranteed basic income, because if we don't, we are not going to be prepared. And that's why I am going to sponsor the bill in Congress right now to pilot program universal basic income, because it is that important. Andrew Yang and I have talked about this. I will have the most extraordinary cabinet in history, I promise you that. Oh.
Hey, so Republican. I'm Molly.
Hey, Molly.
The Republican candidates have been very adamant about economically separating from China. What are some ways that you would sort of manage the U.S. relationship with China, specifically in terms of like how many goods we get from them?
Okay, great question. So our relationship with China will, I think, have a lot to do with where our entire country goes, because unfortunately I'm of the opinion that we have mismanaged this relationship for 30 years. We started by literally handing our economy to them 3 decades ago. That's why we have Trumpism. We have so many heartbroken, angry Americans who were just wanting to work hard at the local factory, especially in the middle of America. And all of those factories got shut down and either went, through NAFTA, went south or north, or went to China. And it was so predictable. We can be a global economy, have a global policy, but protect Americans. So it started 30 years ago. And then they started stealing our IP, our intellectual property, our secrets. And we didn't do anything. And they continue to send fentanyl and drugs through Mexico, and by the way, lots of other places that come right into our country, and they don't do much to stop it. They think it's okay to have TikTok available to all of us. Well, all of us. But it's not okay to have Facebook and Instagram available in China. So I'm of a very simple philosophy. It's called reciprocity. You treat me nicely, I'm going to treat you nicely. You allow our apps to be used in your country, we allow your apps to be used in our country. Right? You trade fairly with us, we trade fairly with you, and if you don't steal our stuff, we will not steal yours. So when we play by different rules, which are rules that I believe in, integrity, the rule of law, international order, we should have expectations of our partners. China's at great risk right now. Their economy is teetering on the edge. Taiwan just elected a very anti-China leader. They're going to have their hands full. So my proposition is this. I always lead believing that peace is possible. And I will lead differently. I would like to meet with President Xi, or frankly, I wish they had a new leader, a next generation leader. And when that person comes, I think we can reset our relationship and start cooperating instead of being enemies. How? Climate change, terrorism. We're not that far away from nuclear weapons being placed in backpacks. And if countries like China and the United States of America don't start cooperating and becoming friends and recognizing what is at risk, everybody's at risk. And they know that. So I think these are two extraordinary countries that have an extraordinary need to work together. And that's how I'll do it. But mark my words, if they won't play by the rules, we're going to treat them differently. And mark my words also, I know how to do it. Having done business there, having served on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I will tell you one more thing. When the last Chinese ambassador was in Washington, the ambassador invited hundreds of people from the administration and Congress to have dinner, doing his job as the ambassador, getting to know people, developing a human relationship. Over the course of a couple years, almost nobody accepted the invitation. Then he's called back to Beijing and made their foreign affairs secretary and their foreign minister. And what was his perspective on the United States? Unfriendly, unhospitable, unwilling, unkind. And I thought to myself, that is unbelievable that in this day and age, we wouldn't even have members of Congress that would break bread. So when the new ambassador arrived not long ago, I had my chief of staff reach out to the Chinese embassy to say, hey, would the ambassador like to have dinner with a handful of members of Congress? And they were very skeptical because they were not accustomed to actually being invited to dinner. And they said yes. So I asked 27, I think, of my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, to join me at this dinner. 2 of them said yes. All 27 wanted to, but you know what they said to me? We know there are cameras outside of the Chinese embassy, and I cannot afford to have that show up in a political ad in the next election. There you have it, my friends. Why am I running for president? I'm telling you the truth. People are not doing their jobs because of politics. They're forgetting their principles. That's how I'm going to lead. I think Donald Trump, when he went to meet Kim Jong-un in North Korea, was actually a smart thing, because if you have a human relationship with someone who has a nuclear button with him at all times, we are a little further away from disaster. Doesn't make them our friends, doesn't make them trustworthy, but it makes them think twice about the person that they just spent time with when they're going to push that button. And that's the difference between leadership and followership.
We have time for one more question, folks. One more.
Global warming.
I like that in this day and age, that's both a statement and a question. You know, the truth is, even my Republican colleagues are acknowledging it's real. Believe that. John Curtis, Republican congressman from Utah, knows it's real, leads the Conservative Climate Caucus in Washington. Benji Backer, a young man who's a dyed-in-the-wool Wisconsin red conservative, is leading the conservative movement for recognizing the truth and doing something about it. So let's start by acknowledging it's real. Let's start by acknowledging Earth will survive. That's the good news. I'm not sure humans will. And we are now finally starting to see what was predicted literally over 100 years ago, that the entrapment of gases because of our burning of fossil fuels will create the very crisis that we're now feeling. Literally, go Google it. You'll see the news articles from the early 1900s telling us exactly what would happen, and it is. And the good news is we can still do something about it. But we've not had an American president who actually did something here in a meaningful way, and we've not had an American president that made it his or her mission to work with leaders around the world, including the Chinese, to do something about it. So here's my proposition. First, we must move from a fossil fuel economy to a fossil fuel-free economy. How do we do that? Through a transitional period. We should not burden hardworking Americans with higher fuel costs. We should do something called carbon fee and dividend. It's a conservative proposition. Citizens Climate Lobby. You put a price on carbon because it is costing this globe and every one of us immense amounts, life, and then you return the proceeds from that right to the people who would otherwise be financially impacted by it. It's called carbon fee and dividend. That's how government should operate. We're not a country that likes mandates. We don't want someone telling us you have to drive an electric car. What we want is incentives and disincentives to change behaviors that are better for the public. That would do it. Do you know that wind is the least expensive form of electricity production now in America? Why? Because we had federal subsidies that made it possible. We didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. We left it because we came up with better ways to do things, and we have those ways to do things. So the question is, why are we not doing them? And here's why. Money. You think the $300 million a year that the pharma industry spends on Washington is a lot? Do you know how much petroleum is spent for generations? Do you know how the Saudis and the Russians and the Iranians will do anything it takes to ensure that people have to rely on fossil fuels? And we took the bait. I think it's time to change. I think in the meantime we should keep prices low, and yes, I think we should do some drilling now to make sure that we at least can afford our market what we need as we transition to fossil fuel free. We should make farmers who we want to change their practices, afford them the resources to do so without being economically impacted. It is not rocket science, and it actually combines the conservative and progressive principles of getting through this so that all of you and your children and your grandchildren and mine have a chance. And that's what I think. So, this is the part of this I hate the most because I got to wrap it up. But I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I'm going to make a simple request of all of you. The story is this. We can talk about climate change and China and taxes and Medicare and Social Security, but the truth of the matter is, if Joe Biden is president, I really don't think we're going to see any change. I don't think he can win anyway. If Donald Trump is president, he's going to be focusing on one thing and one thing only, and you know what that is? Him. It's a revenge mission. If you want any of this really addressed, I should show you my phone. Show you how many of my Republican colleagues in Congress have sent me beautiful notes in the last 2 months. You'd be shocked. You'd also be shocked at how few of my Democratic colleagues have sent me beautiful notes in the last 2 months. Maybe not. I say that because we have to work together. I love my Republican colleagues, many of them, not all of them, most of them. I love Donald Trump supporters. I do not love him. I have great animus towards him. But we have to work together. We have no choice. So the story is this. I believe so deeply in repair and reconciliation that I do a series in Minnesota called Common Ground. We get 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans at a table every 6 weeks or so in Minnesota. And it's facilitated by this amazing organization called Braver Angels. Any of you heard of them? Yeah. If you haven't, I ask that you look into them. They are a remarkable group of Democrats and Republicans all around the country, breaking bread and getting to know each other. So they facilitate this discussion. We had this great episode not long ago where we sit down, we share our life stories for a minute. We talk about healthcare, we talk about immigration, and we talk about national division. Now, it won't surprise you probably that just about everybody agrees. Healthcare is broken. Everyone hates the health insurance companies. Republicans want a thoughtful immigration system. They just want security at the border. And of course, Democrats want a humane system as well. Anyway, at the end of these sessions, we go around the table after 2 hours and we share a little bit about what we got from this experience. And we had this wonderful moment where a young woman, Emily, looks across the table at Dave and says, Dave, when you drove up in your F-150 with that Trump sticker on the back, I almost got back in my car, drove away, because I couldn't even get myself to walk in the building, let alone sit at a table with you. And she says, but I gotta tell you, Dave, I have never sat with a Trump supporter, and I actually like you. And of course we laughed. But what was so amazing, it got around the table to Dave, and Dave says, Emily, when you drove up in your Prius, I wanted to run it over. But I'm glad I didn't, because I got to tell you, I have never sat with a progressive, and I had no idea how much common ground we had. And at that moment, the dyed-in-the-wool Trumper, the bleeding heart liberal, they stood up in front of our table on their own accord, and they hugged each other. And I thought to myself, I don't know if this ends in November. I don't know if this continues for 4 years or 8 for me. But either way, the most remarkable moment of my life was Dave and Emily. Because at a moment where we feel that this country is being so torn apart, we demonstrated that with a little space and place and a little bit of nosh and a little conversation, anything is possible. And that's why when I'm president, I will wake up every morning and go to sleep every night thinking about how we do that. So I love you all. Keep the faith, keep in touch. Please door knock, please vote for me. Please help us write postcards. And if you're anybody canvassing? Anybody got a few moments coming on canvas? We would love it, because I'll tell you why. There is nothing more important than knocking on a neighbor's door and saying, "We need you now." Change the course of history on January 23rd. Please vote for me, and you will see the most beautiful, unexpected, amazing change in what it feels like to be in America than you have ever felt before. I love you all. Let's do it. Woo.
Give it up for the next President of the United States, Congressman Dean Phillips.
Thank you. What's your name?
Folks, if you'd like to join us and knock some doors, sign up to volunteer. Join Ethan at the front. Ethan's waving. He's a great guy. If before you do that, you'd like a photo with the congressman, line up right here where I'm standing, where I'm waving. If you'd like a photo or to meet the congressman, line up right here where I'm standing, single file. Thanks for being here, everybody.